What does a good design partner look like for an engineer?
So that's a challenging question.
What are the negative experiences like with the designer?
Obviously, nobody's perfect.
That's such a great point, Matt.
I feel like once the camera's on, I'm like so nervous. You know?
Hello， 大家好，我是乔先生，欢迎回到我的频道。今天又来到我们边设计边谈的单元了。工程师还有产品经理是我们最常在科技业工作的时候需要合作的伙伴。今天我们就请我的好朋友 Matt 来跟我们聊聊看，到底在工程师的心目中，什么样子的设计师才是好的设计师呢？让我们欢迎 Matt。Hi Matt。
That's okay.
That's okay. That's okay.
Okay.
It's been a while.
Has been a while. Yes. Yeah. This is first time in ages that we've seen each other in person.
Yeah. So I've known Matt for a while, but people don't know who Matt is. Do you mind introducing yourself? Actually, I know that you've been learning Chinese, so feel free to do it in English or in Chinese.
Sure. I'll try my best here. 大家好，我叫 Matt， 我是软体工程师，差不多7年了。我在很大的公司工作了，在很小的公司工作了。我以前做过 mobile app development 和 front-end web development。其实我在一个 company happy hour 认识 George。Oh
my god, this is great. This is great. Okay, this is better.
That was hard.
It's better than what I expected. This is perfect. Today I wanted to have Matt over because I think it's important to learn that designers are not the only people working in tech environments.
Right.
There's also product management as well as engineers. It's important to learn from also the engineering perspective. What exactly is a healthy collaboration looking like? Let's talk a little bit about engineering. What does an engineer do?
So I would say that a software engineer is someone who builds and maintains software. Whether it's for web, mobile, it can be desktop, it can really be anything. There's software everywhere nowadays. As part of that job, building and maintaining software, the software engineer will be writing source code to add new features or fix existing bugs. They'll also be designing the systems and algorithms that drive that software as well. Now, in the context of a product team, there's also going to be an aspect of collaborating with the product manager, with the designer, and the rest of the team. And in those conversations, in that context, the software engineer will often provide engineering expertise.
That sounds right.
I hope so.
What are the common fields in engineering?
So if you're talking about software engineering specifically, there's a whole bunch of different types out there. Some of the common ones, just to name a few, in web development, you'll often hear about front-end developers and back-end developers. Front-end developers are going to be concerned about the code that's actually executing in the browser. Usually some aspect of user interface is involved with that. The back-end developer, in contrast, is working on the services that the front-end will be communicating with. So both are working in the context of the web. There's also mobile app development, which I've done myself, building the apps that are running on iOS as well as Android. And of course, in like all of these different subfields of software engineering, there's specialties as well. So you could do QA, testing software, quality assurance, that type of thing. There's also machine learning nowadays, which is like the hot subfield to go into. So basically, there's just so many different types of software engineering out there. Those are just a couple of the common ones.
When it comes to successful communication, you need to understand each other's goals. What are the common goals of an engineer?
So there's a lot of different goals that an engineer might have. Every product is going to have some sort of definition of success. Every product has a spec, and an engineer's job is to build software that meets that spec. To give you an example, like maybe I'm working on a mobile app, and like the mobile app is supposed to have a certain set of functions that it's supposed to do. What I mean is like an engineer has to implement those functions, and if those functions don't work, they're really not successfully doing their job. Writing software that is bug-free. Writing software that's maintainable. All of these things are some things that an engineer will consider and work on a daily basis in the context of a product team. And all of this needs to happen in a timely fashion because almost every project has some sort of time constraint to it.
You know what? I think that's a great segue for us to get into the second part of our interview. How do engineers define a good, successful designer? What does a good design partner look like for an engineer?
So that's a challenging question, but I would say that a good design partner for an engineer is someone who understands and embraces the perspective that an engineer is going to bring into the design process. So maybe that looks like an understanding of platform conventions. Like this type of scroll bar isn't really used on mobile. This type of menu isn't used on desktop. I don't know, something like that. I want to emphasize though that this collaboration is sort of a two-way street. So where the designer should be embracing the perspective of the engineers, needs to go the other way around as well. The designer is certainly going to consider the product and its interactions at a level that most engineers do not even consider. They don't go that deep. And so the designer can really help the engineer see how their product, the features that they're working on, fit into the much larger picture of the entire experience.
What are the negative experiences like that you've had with the designer?
Obviously, nobody's perfect. Teams will always mess up. It happens. Often there's time constraints associated with a project. Sometimes the engineering team is juggling multiple projects at once. Sometimes the designer needs to build designs collaborating with the product manager and can't really get that feedback from the engineering team. The engineers are just too tied up, they're too busy. What will often happen in this scenario is when the designs are handed off to the engineering team, the engineers they'll say, hold on a second, like we can't do this.
Yeah.
This is not possible. This is not feasible. This would take months. And the response sometimes from management or the rest of the team is, well, we have deadlines. We can't change the designs. You just have to make it work. Tough. I think this type of scenario can sometimes be more common in like the waterfall style of software development, but that's not to say that it can't happen in agile teams as well. And I think that this sort of problem can really be avoided by just communicating earlier. Designers, if you need to ping your engineers and ask them for feedback, ping your engineers. It's fine if you need the feedback. Just reach out to them. It'll save some headaches later and that disaster can be avoided. There shouldn't be just like one touch point. I feel the process should be a lot more iterative. Before like early stage designs, talk to your engineers, get feedback from them there. Take that into account. Again, show them the revamped designs, show them the refactored designs, do the same thing over and over again. That sort of collaboration process doesn't even end when the product is launched, when the feature is launched. Even once you get feedback from the users, the designer and the engineer and the product manager should go back, consider that, and iterate from there.
This is why Matt is a very beloved engineering
Well, thank you.
engineer among designers as well.
I've worked with some designers who are very hands-off, where it's like, here are the designs, have fun engineers, bye. And obviously, if that sort of designer came to me and asked for feedback, if I'm swamped, if I have a billion projects, I feel like I'm much more likely to just be like, this is like the lowest priority thing for me right now. I'll worry about this later. Whereas if I have a much closer relationship to my designer, if my designer is at all my stand-ups, if I grab lunch with my designer every once in a while or something, I had to keep that collaboration and that relationship strong. I'm much more likely to pay attention to the request from the designer saying, hey, can you give me some feedback on this? I want to emphasize that nobody should be working in a silo here. You need to have that strong people relationship if you're going to effectively work and build a product together.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think building those trusting relationships is actually part of the job. No matter which role you're in, when it comes to really difficult times, you need those trusting relationships to help you navigate. So we covered a lot about what are the do's for designers. What are the don'ts, right? What shouldn't a designer do?
So if I were to pick one thing that I really don't like to see a designer do, it's reinvent the wheel when it comes to the user interface. I've worked with some designers who come up with a very specific design for like a scroll bar, or like a hyper-specific toggle button. Depending upon the platform, there's often a set of readily available UI components that do something very similar, if not exactly the same thing. And now that's not to say that like a special component is never justified, but I do think that a designer should always stop and consider what they're doing and ask themselves, is the cost of this component in terms of engineering effort worth it? Does it really affect the interaction that much?
This is such a common case,
Yes,
I think.
I feel it is. Yeah.
I wonder if it's worthwhile for us to kind of reenact a case like that. Are you up for that?
So, sure, we can try it. Yeah.
Hey, Matt.
Hi, George.
So, like that project I was working on, I had this new idea of a play button. I think for users, if they tap on it, they just play it, but that's kind of boring, right? Like we have, more information that we can show with this interaction. What if we add a long press or a hover state for this button that shows up more information?
So what kind of information is going to be visible when the user long presses? What are you going to show to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was thinking, what if we can show like a recent play? So when you play something, you can also look at 5 minutes ago, you're also playing it, so you have more options.
Do you think that our users are going to want to see the recent playlist so much?
You know, I haven't really thought about it. I was thinking the play button is so basic, we don't stand out in the market, right? And then I was just kind of exploring new options. How about this? What do you think about testing it? Right? Like, what if we tested it and see like if actually users find it valuable?
So I think we could definitely do that. I think my concern is that in terms of engineering effort, in order to implement this, we don't have any like out of the box components that we could use that support that sort of long press, long touch interaction. If you feel that this is absolutely necessary, we can talk to the product manager and maybe fit this in. But I think one potential alternative is if the user just taps on the play button, just bring up that playlist and like just like a single press. Like, what if we just like have like a floating dialogue at the bottom of the screen that while the audio is playing, we show the recent playlist? Is that different from the long press? Or
I like that idea because that's what I was thinking. What if we just go back and think about the hypothesis being users might want more options when they hit play? Then it can be tested with all these modules that people can read it. So just be able to test that hypothesis rather than just like dive deep into a very effortful solution. Okay, let's talk about this with the product manager and see if we can fit in.
Sounds good. Yeah, and if you want me to sit down with you and sort of walk through the components that we already have built, so maybe you can leverage something there, just let me know.
Okay, so that's a good example.
It's a little bit of a silly example, like the play button and everything, but like I think the point's like the communication between us there.
Right. A lot of times, like what Matt just encountered, it's not his personal preference. It's just a matter of time, and the team has its goal, which is launching a product and get market feedback as soon as possible. He doesn't want to make me feel bad, but he has to also achieve his goals. If we both stay a little flexible around how we approach that problem, it can be solved. There is a way to get there if we both try to stay a little bit creative.
Right, and I will say that in that conversation we just had, at one point you basically flat out said your goal. You were like, my goal is to think about how we can stand out. Like every application has a play button. How can we be different? I've worked on a couple projects where looking at designs that have been handed off, it's like, why would you do this? Like, what is going? Like, this makes no sense. But then when you hear the goal again, it's like, oh, okay, I sort of understand the bigger picture here. The designer can help the engineer understand how this feature, how this thing that they're building really fits into the greater context of the product that they're building.
This is great. Thank you, Matt.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on this.
今天虽然不是聊设计，但是我希望大家听了之后呢，也可以知道说，其实我们跟工程师并不是敌人。如果我们愿意一起合作，好好的沟通的话，我们可以创造出很棒的产品。记得订阅还有开启小铃铛，这样才不会错过其他更棒的访问内容。那就这样，拜拜。